This is Karen, and this is her son Vincent. Vincent started out life like this. He exists because Karen froze her eggs 10 years ago.
I was faced with a cancer diagnosis and didn't really even know what freezing your eggs entailed. I was crying because I was worried about the money. I found out insurance wouldn't cover it, and I have a girlfriend that sent me a check for $5,000 in the mail with the subject line, "Just do it." I wound up not cashing the check, but I think just seeing that other people were so vested in me doing it. And I did. I wound up freezing my eggs.
Cancer is actually the reason that we're able to freeze eggs today. If you aren't undergoing medical treatment that could potentially impact your fertility, you're probably more likely to have heard about egg freezing here. A number of clinics are using Instagram and other platforms to advertise egg freezing services. Some even throw egg freezing parties complete with champagne and appetizers. It's safe to say egg freezing has gone mainstream. It's now offered as part of benefits packages at companies like Apple, Starbucks, and Walmart. But is it worth it for people who aren't dealing with medical issues? Does it usually even work? Or are people taken advantage of by companies that just want to make money? We talked to 3 people with different perspectives on the issue. Before the early 90s, only 3 women have ever given birth using a frozen egg. That is until a friend of Dr. Debra Gook got cancer. In 1989, Dr. Gook was working at Australia's Royal Women's Hospital doing in vitro fertilization. She found out her friend was diagnosed with cancer and was going to miss her opportunity to be a mom. As Dr. Gook told the New York Times, when she went to her boss and asked to study egg freezing, he pushed back. She eventually convinced him to give her 1 year, a year that would end up changing the course of how babies are born forever. Sperm freezing has been easily accessible since the 70s, but when it came to preserving eggs, the only option back then was to freeze embryos. To Dr. Gook, this basically means single people had to go find a partner to fertilize their eggs or accept they might never be a parent. She wanted to ease this unfair stress. Freezing and preserving something as fragile as human eggs seemed impossible at first. Dr. Gook spent years developing the technique that laid the groundwork for the way we freeze eggs today. Yeah, it took more than just 1 year. But in 1994, she presented her findings to a Reproductive Medicine Society and opened the world's first egg bank. Dr. Gook and others spent years perfecting their methods, and by 2012, the American Society of Reproductive Medicine removed the technique's experimental label. It was 1 year later that Karen found out she had cancer.
So in 2013, I had felt a lump in my left breast. At the time, I was 33 years old, and it wound up being stage 2 cancer. They recommended freezing my eggs, and I hadn't really even thought about having children. I had just been dating my now husband for 3 months. We had to have the conversation about, do we freeze eggs versus embryos? I was like, definitely only going to freeze eggs, even though he was so supportive.
Karen rushed to freeze 12 eggs before chemotherapy. In 2021, cancer-free and ready to start a family, she revisited her frozen eggs.
In my head, I thought 12 eggs was enough. So when they told me they had 12, they're like, 12 eggs is about a baby. We found out that 7 survived the thaw, and then 5 were fertilized. And then when we called them to check in on day 3, they're like, they're not doing well. You need to come in. And so they transferred 3 to me. That moment, I realized if this wasn't successful, I would never have a genetic child. I hadn't realized that there was a possibility that I would only get 1 shot. And the doctors told us every time they called, they said, don't get your hopes up. Don't get your hopes up.
Against all odds, she gave birth the following year.
He's a miracle. If egg freezing didn't exist, I would not be where I am today. I would not have my son, and it gave me back something that cancer took away.
Karen's experience with egg freezing was positive, but not everyone who goes through the process feels that way. And many of them don't ever end up having a baby to show for it. It's hard to measure the success rate of egg freezing. Every clinic measures success differently, taking into account things like a patient's age and the number of eggs retrieved. Depending on where you look, you'll see success rates listed at anywhere from 2% to more than 40%. The cost also varies dramatically, but is commonly estimated at about $10,000 to $20,000 per cycle. And that's not including the cost of storing the eggs or using them after thawing. Each egg freezing cycle takes roughly 2 weeks and involves daily self-injections of hormones, along with other medications as well as lots of doctor visits. Many people have to go through multiple cycles to retrieve enough eggs. Despite the lengthy, painful procedure and the ambiguity around cost and success rates, the number of people freezing their eggs had gone from a few hundred to tens of thousands per year in the past decade. And a lot of them aren't facing medical treatments that affect fertility. Yale University professor Marcia Einhorn interviewed more than 150 people who pursued egg freezing for her latest book.
There's this new population of mostly single women coming for egg freezing. There was an assumption made that the reason women would freeze their eggs is that they were going to try to advance their own education and career trajectories. My study showed that the reason for egg freezing has very little to do with career planning. These are women who already have their careers and their education done, women who are out there in the workforce, who are looking for partners and are having a really difficult time finding a committed relationship. So I soon discovered that this is really an issue about partnership, women's inability to find partners. And I ended up calling it the mating gap, the lack of eligible, educated, equal partners for women who are educated, successful professionals.
And many of these educated, successful professionals have lost a lot of money on egg freezing. Documentary filmmaker Gwen Schrader, who froze her eggs at age 35, shared her experience.
I had just gotten out of a 4.5-year relationship and wasn't ready to dive back in anytime soon. Turns out, after I froze my eggs, I ended up meeting my daughter's dad. She's now 7 years old. We started a family naturally. We're nearing 10 years since I froze my eggs. I don't necessarily want to pay for storage anymore. So I've looked into donating because I went through the LGBTQ program at the clinic at Columbia. I've been thinking about ways in which I can donate my eggs, either scientifically or to a family in need.
Most women have not come back to use their frozen eggs. I personally think that there is aggressive marketing toward younger and younger women in their early 20s. And actually the IVF physicians that I interviewed weren't in agreement with that. Most women in their 20s have good fertility, and some of them are going to meet partners.
The egg freezing industry has been criticized for capitalizing on fertility fear.
There's been a lot of feminist critique of egg freezing. There's been a lot of media critique of egg freezing. It's an invasive and expensive technology. Some women do end up having beautiful frozen egg babies, but a lot of women don't. So women going into it really need to understand that. You may be investing a lot of money in something that ultimately is not going to work for you.
Egg freezing doesn't always deliver what it promises. As more and more people pour their time and savings into this procedure, we desperately need more research and sufficient data to ensure that egg freezing is less of a lottery ticket and more of a meaningful investment in a person's future.